Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining Jason's Amazing Race Recap 37, Episode 6. On today's episode, I'll be discussing Episode 6 of Season 37 of The Amazing Race. It was another exciting episode with new locations and tasks. So let's see how our racers jumped into those challenges. I'm your host, Jason Mogul. After Scott and Lori were eliminated in Episode 5, that left 8 teams in the race. Back in Episode 1, I had predicted Scott and Lori would win it all. I was way off. They were a strong team, but they oversold themselves as feeble and slow, and were targeted by other teams and were U-turned. Jonathan and Anna, who were also U-turned in Episode 5, were able to survive, but they had to play catch-up. Brett and Mark were the first to leave the pit stop at 3:55 a.m. and learned they were headed to Dubai, United Arab Emirates. The city was built up from the desert and is a top cultural, financial, and business center in the world. As such, there is incredible wealth there, making it plush and luxurious. To get there, it is a 9-hour flight from Bali. If you're curious as to how much time they spent on the airplane. As I mentioned in past episodes, every time I see racers head to the airport, I'm curious as to their plan to get tickets. So when I heard the clue, I leaned forward in my chair and listened intently. What method will they use to get tickets, and why choose that method? What is the best strategy? Brett and Mark went to a travel agency to get tickets, and it seemed they were the only team to do that. While they didn't overtly show it, it appeared all other teams went directly to the airport to get their tickets. But the airport ticket counters didn't open until 7:50 a.m. Carson and Jack left next, 9 minutes later. And Alyssa and Josiah, they left in third place, 5 minutes after Carson and Jack. The last to leave were Jonathan and Anna at 5:29 a.m., which means the time gap between the first place team and the last place team was about an hour and a half. At the travel agency, Brett and Mark realized all teams would be on the same flight. The hour and a half gap just closed, with all teams bunching up on the same airplane. The advantage now would go to the team that got off the plane the fastest in Dubai, which means, I think, teams would want to get as close to the exit as possible. In order to do that, a team needed to get tickets before the other teams so they can secure a good spot on the plane. But no one seemed to do that. Why wasn't there more of a scramble to be the first to get tickets, like we saw in Leg 1? I just don't know. This runs counter to how I've seen racers behave in the past. There may be more to the story than we saw here. Anyway, at the airport, teams were still reeling from the effects of the U-turn voting and tried to smooth over ruffled feathers for how they voted, especially with Jonathan and Anna. You could tell some teams, like Carson and Jack, and Alyssa and Josiah, worried about how that might play out in the future. It was dark when they landed in Dubai, and teams had to travel by taxi to a Bedouin camp in the desert, select a coffee cup with a marked time, have some dinner, and some music, and settle in for the night. All teams slept in a large tent in the same room. Josiah joked about having dinner in desert instead of dessert. Moans and groans came from the other teams because of the bad pun. There would be 2 groups, one leaving at 5:10 a.m. in the next morning, and the second leaving at 5:20 a.m. As the sun rose, 4 teams per group rode camels through the desert. 1 team per camel to a clue box. Jonathan and Anna were in the lead camel, essentially catching up to the other teams. The clue told them to travel by foot to a local airstrip and face a roadblock. Drop into Dubai. 1 team member partnered with an instructor and skydived, while the other waited on the ground at the drop zone for their return. There were 4 teams per airplane. Once on the ground, teams could then try for the fast forward. Carson and Jack signed up for the first spot, and would jump first. Melinda and Erica took the last slot. On the first flight, it was Jack, Holden, Alyssa, and Anna. Brett, Nick, Pops, and Melinda were on the second flight. It worked out for Melinda. She needed to do a roadblock to keep the balance, as I discussed last episode, and this one fit her well. However, with Alyssa in the air, Josiah became emotional, worried about her safety, then wiping away his tears as she landed. It was a very human moment on the show, and it was genuine. Even Jeff was affected by it. Jack landed first, with Holden right behind him. Both teams decided to try for the fast forward. It became a foot race around the parking lot to find an orange luxury car, which looked like it was an Audi, to take him to the fast forward. It was Carson and Jack who found it first and hopped in. Han and Holden, and also Alyssa and Josiah, watched as they drove away. With the fast forward taken, teams grabbed a clue which told them to go to Atlantis the Royal, a super luxury hotel that looked like it was made from giant Lego bricks, one brick thick and stacked in an S shape. The clue provided route info for the next task. It wasn't really a roadblock, and it really wasn't a detour. It was a task both team members performed together. They had to finish decorating small cakes and other treats to the satisfaction of Chef Christoph. It was a food prep task that required attention to detail and a steady and delicate hand. Meanwhile, Carson and Jack arrived at the fast forward to go scuba diving in the world's largest indoor diving pool at 200 feet deep. Fast forwards are so attractive to attempt because if successful, teams can skip all other tasks and go directly to the pit stop. It can be a huge advantage to complete successfully. However, they are usually hard, involving things like walking across ropes very high above the ground, or eating bugs, or getting your head shaved, or even getting a tattoo. Remember that one? This one involves scuba diving, so someone who didn't swim well or was afraid of water may have trouble. Carson and Jack had to scuba dive in the deep pool and find what looked like a glass brick with some fast-forward symbols on it. They received some training and started swimming. Back at Atlantis, the Royal, Alyssa and Josiah failed on their first attempt, with Josiah starstruck by the chef. It was humorous to see how giddy he got. Even Han and Holden were charmed. I think it was Holden who compared the task to doing elementary school art projects, and I immediately pictured gluing macaroni to a shoebox. Anyone else do that in school? Then your mom kept it, just because you made it. Anyway, Alyssa and Josiah finished first on their second attempt and left to find a clue box on a public beach. The other teams finished one by one, but when Pops and Jeff took their tray to the chef for inspection, Jeff's hand accidentally messed up one of the cakes, and they had to go back and fix it. Nick and Mike, and Melinda and Erica passed them, leaving the father and son in last place. At the fast forward, Carson and Jack found and retrieved the glass brick and headed off to the pit stop. They didn't seem challenged by the fast forward task. It was just a go-do task for them. It was Alyssa and Josiah who found the clue box on the beach first, and it revealed a second roadblock on this leg: ride a wave. It required a team member to ride an e-foil, an electrically powered, motorized surfboard that had an airfoil on the bottom. Racers had to enter the water with the e-foil, get to their feet on it in a certain distance, and then ride it for another specified distance. Meanwhile, Carson and Jack arrived first at the pit stop, which was at the Museum of the Future, a stainless steel structure that looked like a donut standing on edge and flattened down. Museum of the Future. What do you put in a museum dedicated to things from the future? Stuff from the future, which there aren't any yet. No, but seriously, The museum imagines a possible life in 2071 and asks, what do we need to do now to make that happen? I'm sure it's a much better museum than what I'm joking about here. At the beach, Han was the best surfer out there, and it took only one attempt for her to do it. She and Holden left and had to take a taxi to a metro station, buy tickets, and then ride the train to find Phil outside of the museum. Josiah, however, struggled riding the e-foil. It took him 3 attempts to complete, but he and Alyssa finished next. Then Mark completed it in 2 attempts. After going slow and steady, it only took Erica 1 attempt. Jonathan finished next after 2 attempts, and that left Jeff and Nick to duke it out to avoid last place. It was Jeff who finished next, and off he went with Pops to the metro station. They needed to get tickets and get on a train before Nick and Mike arrived, to avoid having both teams on the same train. But Pops and Jeff missed the train by just a few seconds. Jeff was unsure if it was the right train and hesitated, just for a moment. They had a chance to get on the train, but the doors closed and left Pops and Jeff on the platform, waiting to see if Nick and Mike would catch up. The next train was in 4 minutes. Nick finished the roadblock, and he and Mike did catch up. Now, both teams were on the same train. It would be a foot race from the train, through the museum, where they had to walk, and outside to find Phil. The teams prepped for the foot race. Pops and Jeff made sure their shoes were tied. Nick took a puff from his inhaler. Then the train doors opened, and off they went, their racing future on the line. Through the museum, walking as fast as the rules allowed, they saw a door and thought it was an exit. But nope, not an exit. They were walking fast, bunched up together. But in the end, it was Nick and Mike who were able to run faster than Pops and get 7th place. Pops arrived last by just 10 seconds, and he and Jeff were eliminated. I was sorry to see Pops and Jeff go. They were a very likable team and raced their hearts out. They may not have been a top team, but their elimination wasn't due to their lack of effort. They never quit. When Phil announced that Jonathan and Anna had finished 5th, Jonathan said nothing and reacted little. In fact, he didn't say much all leg, really, like he was still recovering from the last leg, or something. He and Anna did move up from 8th on the last leg to 5th on this one. We heard at least 2 nicknames for racers this episode. Holden called Jonathan the Terminator, and Josiah called Han the Hanster, short for Han the Monster, because of how well she and Holden did that leg. Looking ahead to the next episode, we saw on the preview that teams will need to drive and navigate themselves. So far this season, there have been a lot of taxis, trains, planes, walking, but little self-driving. Just when they went to LAX in Leg 1. Now we'll see how teams navigate on their own. After watching all past legs of all past seasons, I have come to the conclusion that the number one reason why teams get eliminated on The Amazing Race is due to issues with navigation. Navigation, navigation, navigation is what my family hears me say all the time. I don't have hard data on this because of the difficulty assigning just one specific reason for elimination, but I consider navigation as one of my Super 7 essential skills needed to be successful on The Amazing Race. Another one is the ability to drive a manual transmission. Will teams face that challenge in the future? I hope so, because I'm looking forward to see who is good at it and who is not. Also looking to the next leg, we see there is another double U-turn coming up. A little earlier than I expected, but I did suspect we would see another one. This will be another key event in the race, in my opinion, as we watch what teams do, given the voting decisions on the last leg. As I have discussed on past episodes, I thought it too early in the season to play offense, with a possible U-turn yet to come. So now, After this next U-turn, it will be time, in my opinion, for teams to change strategy and play the meta game offensively to get an advantage. I expect teams to really go on the offense, take off the gloves, so to speak, no longer play nicety-nice with each other, like they did at the airport in Indonesia, and go for the jugular. The first two teams to arrive at the U-turn should U-turn their perceived strongest team, in my opinion, but we may also see some decisions based on emotion, not based on logic. I don't expect anyone to abstain from using the U-turn. And on my next episode, I'll examine how the second U-turn unfolded and compare it to how teams voted on the first U-turn. That's all for today. As always, I thank you for listening to me here in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I invite you to join me next time for episode number 7 of Jason's Amazing Race Recap 37. See you then.